Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to thank you for coming to our artist talks for this year's candidacy exhibition entitled With Pleasure. We will go through our work through the gallery. Each of us has a short statement at the beginning to make about our work, and then some questions prepared for each other. And then we'd like to welcome you to ask any additional questions you may have. And we'll start with Madi Ortega first.
All right. Hi everyone, my name is Madi Ortega. Sheryl, you know that. I'm a second year MFA at TCU, focusing on sculpture, although I did creative painting. My work is encompassing my memories as a child, visiting my family's property in East Texas. It was a property that we went to every now and then, and I retain memories growing up, catching grasshoppers, eating catfish, things like that. And so all of these works are referencing those ideas. So I have this piece here, the birdhouse, the grass, this grasshopper cup on the ground, and the painting.
Can you talk about the relationship between the birdhouse and the grass? I know they were both brought from the farm, and I'm interested in the relationship between the two and why it is important to physically remove those objects and bring them.
So the grass, I actually dug up from the property itself and transported it here and placed it in the gallery. And I did the same thing with the birdhouse. I took it from its hole in the ground and transported it here and tied it to the pole. Both of those are really physical acts that involve me and processes at the farm and my body actually being there, which is something I've realized is important in my work, and me imagining myself in that place. And so I think that really is the forefront of why I directly brought those objects into the space. Yeah.
I find it interesting that you tend to hide elements of your work, and I know that's a big part of your art making, so that you like collaborating with
As you can see in the work, I really enjoy hiding elements or making kind of Easter egg surprises for the viewer to discover as they're looking at the work. In the birdhouse, I actually have wooden spoons and spatulas that are helping hold up the birdhouse, in addition to it being tied around the pole. And then I have this clear plastic cup on the ground, which is hard to see for viewers, and kind of creates a direct interaction with the viewer. If they stumble over it or having to get down and look at it, and same for the birdhouse, looking for those specific elements. I think that has to do with the farm being really personal to me and wanting to only give away so much information, but also giving the viewer a certain amount of information every now and then, and creating that direct relationship with the viewer in the space that it's being presented.
Madi, could you talk about your choice to create a painting, and that so many of your works in the show are the actual artifacts brought in to talk about the memory, and in this case, the memory has been recreated.
Yeah, so the painting was actually the last thing that I created for the show. And I think it kind of triggered new ideas of me not wanting to directly take as much from the farm and bring it here. And a lot of my work has to do with these ideas of my grandparents at the farm creating these weird solutions for problems, like stopping leaks in the roof with wooden spatulas and things like that. So I thought it'd be interesting to do a really traditional process like oil painting on a piece of construction plywood and kind of have that interaction between a really refined traditional process and something that is not so refined.
Any other questions?
When will these part of the process?
Yeah, so we actually are moving this show to another space where it will be shown again. They're going to change a little bit most likely, and then after that, the grass will either be used to collect the clay from it, and then it will be used for other works with the clay, which I found out that I can fire and make into kind of solidified objects. Or I will take it back to the farm and kind of mix it into where I took it from, where we replanted like wild grass seed and wildflowers. And then the birdhouse will go back to the property, but will be put in a different place.
What do you think with this new body of work and after I guess reflecting those memories from the farm, like how are you thinking this body of work and moving forward with it, or maybe what have you learned from this body of work about maybe those memories?
I think I learned mostly through creating the work that I myself hold a lot of the same kind of processes and mindsets that my grandparents had, which is what inspired me for the work. So things like jerry-rigging and creating molecular solutions to problems. And so I found that I don't have to directly reference my grandparents in the work anymore. It could be just about me and my own processes and mindset. So going forward, the work will be me being inspired by the objects and materials of the farm, but using my own mindset.
Do you think when you're digging up the grass and taking out the birdhouse and you're moving it here, are those actions, how would you categorize them into being part of the sculpture? Are they part of the elements that make it up, or are they the process that you go through to compose them, or how would you fit that into just the general idea of the work?
You're talking about like how does it fit into the concepts of the work?
Yeah, just like the history of how it got to be in a certain place. Do you think that's important as part of the context?
Yeah, I think the history of removing it from that place and putting it into the white box gallery, and kind of having this direct relationship with the gallery itself through the floor or the pole, is important because it speaks to like me in a way saying I'm gonna like put this here, and it's not like the traditional painting on the wall. Yeah. It's a difficult question.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to put it into words. It's almost like if you see a painting on the wall, and rather than just taking the painting, you take the entire wall with you.
Right.
To,
And I
to
think-
capture that kind of atmosphere and environment. So
Yeah, I think that comes from what I was saying about me being in that space and being inspired by the space itself and displacing it and putting it in the gallery versus kind of referencing it through painting or something like that.
Yeah, this is a follow-on question. It's a nice question. Do you document when you're removing those items with video and photographs?
Yeah, for these works, I did do video and photographs. And then also what I did with the land after I removed things. I'm just trying to figure out if I want to incorporate that as artwork in my body of work, or if it just becomes kind of documentation of the process, and that's the only way it exists.
Thanks, Mary.
So we're right to these works. If you don't mind, my name is Loftis. I'm a second year MFA. My candidacy show. So something that I found interesting about the work when I was thinking about it for this talk was that all of this the past because of my upbringing with my grandparents. And so it was sort of like this epiphany in my mind that like, wow, there's like this whole history of like judgment on the body, and more specifically to me, judgment on the male body and how we don't speak about it. And so that kind of like was a catalyst for the work in the show. Another important element is the small little Easter eggs, much like Maddie's work, that are sort of hidden throughout the show. So like I have a lot of writing, and on the exterior wall, I don't know if anybody has noticed, but there's a lot of prints with a lot of publications and writing that are from like my own experiences. And one in particular is this little notebook, which I know most people didn't see it, but I wanted to read what was on it. So it says, "I'm feeling extremely anxious today, like the world is crushing in, like my life doesn't matter, like I always am wrong. Why? When I feel like I'm strong and loved and passionate, why does my mind revert back to a day that once was, to a life that's no more? I hate my hairline, I hate my clothes, I hate the way my eyes begin to wrinkle. Why do I look into the reflection of a man and I still see a boy? My pupils are bleeding, my eyes are throbbing. I'm afraid of being alone. I'm an island within myself, but," and then the other page says, "exit, exit, 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 exit." And so that little writing, and all the writing actually in this work, is hidden for a reason. Just the fact that I don't want it to be obvious, but also I feel like hiding it and concealing it becomes a little bit more intimate. So you have to go up to it and actually get close to read it, even if you don't see it at first. All the work I wanted to have a sort of formal aspect to it and kind of be objects within a space and sort of jarring with these like sort of images. But once you got close, then you saw the little Easter eggs. Yeah. Just gonna take questions.
Can you talk about the relationship between the grid, this piece here, and the chairs on the wall?
So originally, I wanted this idea of educational chairs sitting and waiting to have the photograph taken. So that sort of anxiety of sitting and waiting. Because I can imagine like someone that has been asked to like strip down naked in front of a bunch of people that they don't know and have a photograph taken you're probably pretty anxious. So I wanted that idea of like being sitting and waiting in relation to this. That direct conversation between the two.
What were your intentions behind boarding up the women?
So this was a piece that has kind of evolved. It was the one piece that I knew that I wanted in the show, and it then has evolved into something different. But there's two aspects to this window that are important. So the idea of abandonment, so abandoning all of these ideas that are in here, and then also the idea of the inside and the outside, which referring to my own psyche. So what we portray to others in public versus what you feel like within yourself.
Could you expand a little further on that last point, the inside and the outside? I know what I've been thinking about that piece, that there's certain aspects that are only visible outside the gallery that are kind of closed off from immediate conversation with these pieces. Could you just expand on that choice to leave that outside the gallery or over the outside?
Yeah, so like a lot like with the little notebook, I wanted it to be sort of hidden. And so like the exterior is what like I'm filling, but I'm playing with the idea of the reversal. And so this would be the exterior wall reversed within this space. And so that's why I added the construction like paint to imply that this is an exterior wall, not an interior wall, and that being flipped. And so also I knew that the idea of sandwiching glass, especially like tinted glass with the wood, would make it not as visible and not as obvious. And so I wanted it to not be like when you walk in, that it's like, oh, here's the posters, this is what it's about, let's dismiss it and move on. And so the idea was to like have it on the exterior so that way it wasn't like maybe visible until you went to the window and realized that, oh, this is not a part of just the gallery because the window broke. Let's go outside and see why. You know. Yeah.
It's an interesting point that you brought up with like inside versus outside animation. I'm also thinking in terms of like, you know, how you talk about like insecurities when you have those types of things. For me personally, it kind of calls on like a tendency to like shut yourself in from other people because you don't want to be judged or seen as those imperfections, and there's the paint on the inside of the wood, and on the outside there's the images and all the other stuff. And, it really has an interesting contrast of like I guess perspective and what people can see on the outside and what's happening on the inside. So is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Nice.
On that note, I think it's.
Can you talk about this?
On that note, I think it's interesting that you placed your wall in between the two pieces. Since it shows, like, you can't really see outside since it's tinted, but once you get in here, you realize, or you have the idea that people could see, and so technically the people waiting would be visible and like viewable, the naked person would be visible and viewable. Was that a conceptual decision, or was it more of like an aesthetic choice?
I mean, at first it definitely is like just a aesthetic reason, Like I definitely thought about considering more windows, but the idea of it like being in the middle just made more sense. There was more symmetry within it. But that's a great point about the exposing to the outside. So it definitely was an aesthetic thing because I didn't want to wear all the windows. But yeah.
I had sort of a question relating to the audience interacting, because you said they have like hidden images or hidden stuff around. How far would you be able to interact? Because I know like this piece right here, did you want the audience to stand on the pedestal and be there, or like were they supposed to interact with that?
Yeah. I think that I definitely thought about it, and people have asked if they could, so that's definitely something that comes into play. But like my intention of like bringing this to a white wall space is like no one's going to come, especially in an institution, and like actually go and stand on it. Even though somebody asked and I actually did it open, but yeah, definitely like. It's not my intention for somebody to interact with it.
Then you want to talk about the badges on the chairs.
Oh, the little flags.
The plaques, yeah. What were you thinking about?
So a chair always represents a body to me. I've used a chair as sort of a motif a lot. And so the idea was 3 chairs for 3 body types. So there's the mesomorph, ectomorph, and endomorph, which is basically skinny, muscular, and fat. And so the muscular is the one on top that's flipped over because that's the ideal body type. And so originally I was going to have them like placed on the ground, but then when playing with them on the cart, I had the idea of like wheeling that out. Wielding those like stereotypes of body types and like saying that one is better than the other, and the idea of like that moving out is sort of important to my work and important to me. So that's kind of the basis of that piece.
So I'll go ahead and we'll talk about my work here. My name is Sheryl Anaya. I'm a second year MFA student with an emphasis in sculpture. And this body of work is tied to my memory in domestic spaces and memories of growing up in
Can you talk a little bit more about storytelling and like that through the text and then writing a story?
Yeah, I think like the main, what I was thinking about, you know, this work is all very personal to me, but we all eat and we all spend time in the kitchen, like, or, you know, at the table or, you know, in front of the TV on the couch or, you know, with families and loved ones. And so the text is, you know, a direct story, but I think that, you know, there are things that everybody can relate to that kind of brings back those memories of, like your own lived experiences through me telling my story.
So with the stencil on the ground, it's made of tiny little, like, you know, grains and all this stuff, right? And that they make up the word that makes up the whole piece. I was here on the opening night. You know, there's a couple times that someone almost stepped on it or did step on it.
Yeah.
What's the significance of having to maintain something that's so complex and at the same time is very detailed and representative of the culture?
Yeah, I think I knew that the piece would get stepped on. You know, obviously that wasn't the intention going in, but that was something that I was conscious of, and I think it kind of relates back to sort of that imperfection of memory and like the erasure of things and you know, remember the ideas of like remembering things.
So it's sort of a responsibility to keep that there.
Yeah. Well, but in the case of this piece, I haven't gone back to like since the opening, you know, to fix it. So kind of okay with, you know, things getting erased or, you know.
I think the way that you're, I know I'm so quiet, I'm sorry. I think the way that you treat your objects in that childlike manner is really interesting when it's butted up against your text, because your text is so adult in the way that you speak. And it feels kind of like an 80s movie when the narrator is narrating over their younger self in this weird reflection. And even like the consideration of distance between the two, I think the play in that is really interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Or like, you know, the text feeling so adult compared to what's
Can you talk about the importance of like the wallpaper as well? And
Yeah.
like how that adds to everything?
Yeah. So the wallpaper is oil pastel drawings that I scanned in and turned it into the wallpaper. And they represent the mango tree at my grandparents' house. And like all of these memories tied to that. And playing, like my brother and I would play baseball with the rotten mangoes that had fallen, you know, and so kind of that like connection to food, and every time we would go there, it was always, we were always waiting to eat, and yeah, just all those memories.
I'm curious to hear you talk about the way that you have the shelves, like sort of scattered, like it's very intentional. So it seems like a really intentional choice.
Yeah, I thought a lot about how I wanted to present the food objects, and one of those things that can really like trigger the memory quickly. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to use the spice for the text, and to have it laid out that way. Yeah.
Cheryl, it seems like there's 4 distinct works in the show. Can you talk about like choice of installation? There's clearly no delineation between them.
Yeah.
Why did you not separate them out, or why did you kind of weave them all together?
It was really, like, I wanted all of the works to speak to each other, in a way where they're in conversation with each other, very clearly. And I, also, even like within the space, I was thinking about how to use the space in this gallery so that those objects can have that conversation.
Could they be seen differently than this?
I could see this installation looking different in a different space. Thanks, Cheryl. I think here's the best place to stand. There's one sort of peek of who works behind the ground. My name is Sarah Theurer Hunt. I am under the painting emphasis while here in my second year. A lot of my work revolves around my current regional environment. For research for most of my pieces, I take many walks and hikes and spend a lot of time out in my natural environment and ecosystem, often alone, and thinking about the connection between body and the immediate space around it, and moving through that environment and how it helps us come to, for me, the land helps me understand my body and myself better. And when my body and myself, using that as a tool, helps me to understand space and time in these natural spaces better. Yes. Can you talk about this piece in the round and its relationship to the other paintings in the prints? Like, why is it standing alone in the round rather than like one long continuous piece? Yeah, the elephant in the room. I almost never work in landscape format. Almost never work horizontally oriented. For me, when I'm thinking about these spaces and the in-between and these entanglements, it works better for me to think of it as a portrait of space. And so, with that theme, I was thinking about what if I could expand that so it felt more like a walk. I just didn't want it to ever feel like a vista or a peak or they are landscapes, but a landscape per se in the traditional Western perspective. And so I was thinking about, in a class we had last semester, we talked about the more Eastern traditional landscape and Chinese scrolls and traditional photos. And I was thinking about if the scroll were reversed and how it's a walk, and what if it could become like a loop that you walked with, or encourage air conditioners, vents, things that squeak, bicycles I hear out as I'm walking outdoors outside. And they're layered to kind of create a recreation like the paintings of these areas I was looking through. So that was that. The dimness had more to do with the space. That when these were, there's so many, on the paintings in the dark areas, there's lots of layers of glazed wax. So when you get close and you move, certain foliage appears and disappears. And that was easier to show with the lighting in my studio and the spaces outside it when I was working on them. When I brought the works in here, a lot of it disappeared or was hyper-reflective. It was a challenge that I learned a lot from, and dimming the lights allowed a lot of that to come out more. So it was a practical decision, but I think it does work with the feeling that I want the work to have. That was a long answer.
Will your work continue exploring just night walks, or are you going to diversify again or switch around?
We're finishing up a few works right now that are still based in like nocturnal walks. But I think I'm gonna step away from it, at least in some of my work. I have some other veins that are still connected to the idea of moving through these spaces, but not at night. I like the idea that there's more to continue to chew on there, but I need a break from dark paintings and maybe from walking by myself through those spaces. Just a couple months, especially when it's this cold at night.
What is close to the concept of walking is this embedded concept of time as a perception and as a material. So when you say not incorporate walking, but would you keep explore with having time as were experimental time as part of your work?
Absolutely. I think time and space are really central to at least what keeps me coming back to certain imagery. For me, I really connect with the land, but it's a tool I use to keep thinking about time and space. There's other tools there. I don't think I'm leaving walking. I think I'm continuing walking. I'm just maybe going to take a break from walking at night.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The activity of the walk.
The time of it will be shifted. But the activity, I think, there's a lot more I'm thinking of and how it helps my heart. There is, the sound piece is difficult to hear with the air conditioning, but if you get close to that, you can hear it. And that I think is also really good.
Do you think you'll continue with sound in the future, or how might that look, or have you even thought of that far ahead?
I want to, I am interested in it. There's a few other pieces I've been playing with, not connected to paintings. I want to spend some time with sound by itself.
I have a question, and it's really for all the four of you. It seems like you've touched on it at least, but I think in your statement you actually used the word memory. So everybody here, which I think is unusual for a group, all are basing your work on some aspect of memory. I don't know what my question is, but I'm curious why everybody is looking towards memory to make your work.
We talked about this leading up to the show and the title. Memory and place were the two things that a lot of us had connection to. I can't speak for you guys. I'd love to hear your answer. I wonder, I'm still trying to think why, but I wonder if it has something to do with coming into graduate school in the middle of a pandemic. That it is a time that's been a little hard to be present because everything's shifting and constantly moving and constantly different. That I think I find myself attaching to things that I had that were stable, or felt more stable than right now, working on my artwork.
I think for me, my work based on my grandmother had Alzheimer's. So it was a questioning of that sort of like memory loss. And then it started kind of to evolve into a memory that is based on my own experiences. And I feel like that's the easiest connection to sort of be vulnerable and show how I make is through memory, which could be related to other people. So I feel like that's just, there's something in memory with that.
You know, I think a lot of it is unpacking sort of like personal identity, using memory as a vehicle through like culture. I think in the future it'll come through like relationships and sexuality. But I think, yeah, it's sort of the vehicle to get to this unpacking of who I am at the core, and how does that relate to other people.
I agree. I think, like, in more detail, I agree with Sarah a lot, that I think for me it's a lot about self-reflection, and how that was accelerated by the pandemic, and kind of having a lot of time to ourselves, and thinking about our self-identity and what that means, what makes